we've always done, if you all, as the saying goes, if you always done what you've always did, as the saying goes, if you always done what you've always did, you always get what you always got. Did I say that right?
You did it mostly right.
That's for the real.
Yep.
I'm going to avoid it because I'm going to f*** it up. All right, welcome back to the roundtable. Are you managing IT abroad? Are you thinking of expanding outside of the U.S.? Today's guest is an expert in that field. We have Sean Woods from Y Technology. We're going to dive into this topic. Sean, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Tony.
Yeah. So you're with Y Technology. I'll let you introduce yourself and your company, but today's topic is managing IT abroad, and it's a different world outside of the U.S., something that you exposed me to many years ago. But yeah, let's start a little bit about yourself and your company.
My name is Sean Woods, as you said, and I represent WY Technology. And we have been involved in helping multinational and international businesses be successful in their operations, globally. So we started in 99 and then started on the international side in approximately 2004 and then took it from there. So we've been doing this for some time and have learned a lot and helped our customers be able to navigate around certain difficulties and helping them to understand what can be navigated around and what cannot, and what is just what it is, right? So,
Sean, when companies are thinking about going to an international location, or they're having trouble navigating their international locations, at what point should they start planning about these conversations that you're talking about, the logistics and talk a little bit about when to get you involved. When's the best time?
That's a great question. Because one of the first questions that we ask businesses when they approach us is your corporate entity invested in taking your values and instilling them to that facility in that other country, and we find that's key, because if there's confusion about that, whether they're going to take those values and instill them into that entity abroad, or there's vacillation, or certain people agree on it and certain people don't, then you're going to run into problems right away.
I've seen that domestically, like tire companies. There's a big tire manufacturer out of Buffalo that got acquired and from a Japanese-owned company, and we ended up interviewing one of the employees who left there, and she cited the values. She goes, they were bringing the corporate company values from Japan into this plant in U.S. So I think about change management and help me understand, like, so when I think of a place like Germany, they're pretty, it's my opinion, set in their ways. There's a very specific process. So having that conversation, like you said, setting the stage up front, how do you handle the resistance and just the culture of, is there's still ugly American culture thinking out there, or their ways better? And so how do you navigate?
Yeah, a lot of it is, first of all, is just working with the management team in the beginning stages, saying, listen, we're gonna give it to you in a very open way, okay? And it's not personal. We're not saying anything personal about the particular group in that country, in that entity, and understand that this is just typically, generally speaking, the way that they conduct business over there, right? And so when we help them be prepared for it and then know how they'll respond to that, rather than kind of being proactive with respect to that, and giving them kind of case scenarios, right? you may run into this specific situation or this specific. How do you guys plan on dealing with that? And then they can start to prepare themselves instead of dealing with it reactively. Because if we're, helping them with a particular project or just, generally launching particular services out there, then they're going to run into issues if we don't continue to stay proactive about that, which is going to slow it down or actually cause, a failure within that particular project.
What do you do? Because culture is so critical, right? I mean, if we don't have a team that's playing as a team, at least at some level, it's going to be really tough to succeed or at least have the optimal operation that I think you would be hoping for as you expand. So what do you do about those countries where maybe traditional American corporate values, whatever your corporate values happen to be, don't translate? They just don't translate. What do you do about that?
Well, typically we team whoever the lead is. Let's say you mentioned Germany. Let's say we got a project and the company wants to launch in Germany. Okay, let's say it's ERP systems, right? Okay, a lot of moving pieces, as you know, and so we would actually team somebody up from, let's say the corporate is based out of U.S. or Canada, but we team somebody up from the corporate office with that lead in Germany, okay, and start to have them work closer together, right? And then that lead in the U.S. they're gonna start to see what we're talking about, right? They're gonna start to see some of those specifics and where that crossover is and where potential miscommunications, okay? Because it's not just understanding what they're saying, right? It's understanding what that meaning is, okay? So if he starts talking to the guy lead in Germany and he's saying, he's using particular words, and the guy in the US sits there and goes, okay, well, I understand what that to mean. And then all of a sudden they revisit it again and it wasn't the same meaning, okay, that the guy thought he had. So he just spent maybe 5 hours going a different direction based upon what he thought was meant. So it's much more than just understanding the words that they're using and, I understand what that word means.
Yeah.
It's what is that actual total meaning that person's saying.
Yeah. So if I go just a little deeper, and then I'll let you in, Tony, because I know you got something. but I'm intrigued because I had a client get jammed up on this a few years ago. But let's call them unauthorized incentives, or some people call them bribes. But the fact is that in some countries, South America, places in Asia, some kind of monetary grease to an individual to make something happen is a way of life. But in the U.S., depending on the industry you're in, that bribe is illegal, whether you gave it in the U.S. or you gave it overseas.
Right.
So what do you do about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because some customers, we've actually, we've addressed this right from the get-go. And sometimes the initial reaction from the corporate entity was like, I can't believe you said that. That's very judgmental statement, or that's this statement. And we're like, okay, hold up. Let's back up. There is nothing personal about this. We're just telling you, generally speaking, what you're going to be running, what you may run into. And, for certain areas, like it's a lot of countries in Asia, let's just say, okay? And I could say the different countries, but
don't do that, Sean. You don't want to lose customers.
It's normal. It's a normal way of doing business to receive kickbacks.
Exactly. So that's where I think if you play too hard a line of our American values, that doesn't necessarily translate into the landlord of the business park you're trying to build. And if that landlord is expecting a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue to move things along, that's just a reality of that area. That might get someone fired back here, but do you want that plant operational or not? Because you're not in the U.S. anymore.
And sometimes we're brought in. Okay, so let's say
to deliver the Johnny Walker?
No. No, in fact, the opposite. So what happens is sometimes we end up becoming the eyes and the ears, okay, for that corporate entity.
Yeah.
So we're actually helping to protect their interests as a whole.
Well, my comment was about getting business running, operational.
Okay.
Whether right or wrong, right? But company I worked for in the past, like that was reality. Now, once you launch and you're live and now it's your world, I think narrative's a little different. But getting established, getting stuff done,
Right.
I think there's a little bit of a culture play.
Sure. And depending upon how far along we're brought into that scenario, right? If the local entity, let's say, in a country in Asia, let's say, and we're brought in for, but we were brought in, let's say, last, as opposed to more in towards the beginning stages. Well, the local team is usually already choose their they've chosen their subcontractors, right? And then we come in, and then what ends up happening is, oh, wait a minute, you're screwing up our groove. We already got these things set. We got our contractors set, and we already have the relationships, and we already have what we're receiving from them. And then we've just disrupted that. Okay, so I won't necessarily go down to that hole or whatever, but it happens pretty common.
Yeah.
And so we are already prepared, how we're going to handle that situation. And I'm not saying also that to kind of take a step back. I'm not saying that you should be instilling your values from your corporate office to that entity, and I'm not saying that should happen. It's just that the decision and the commitment you have to know beforehand, because if you try to do that during the middle of it, you're going to get a lot of kickback. Okay.
Yeah.
Because if you're not pushing it in the beginning, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, okay, we have an issue. We got to make a decision, and then okay, let's instill those values. After you kind of were a little wishy-washy in the beginning, then you're going to get a lot of kickback, right?
That's great advice, and I want to circle back to Asia in a bit, but because I do feel so the phrase "This is China," the acronym TIC.
TIC.
I mean that's a thing. I mean, there's a reason behind it, and we'll touch upon that in a little bit. But
just to our friends that are thinking of expanding, don't use that acronym in China.
Internal discussion only, right?
That's right. It's kind of like taco. Just don't bring that up in the interview, right?
That's right. All right. So, but collaboration, team, global organization, different time zones. You have Europe, you have a 5-6 hour, maybe 7 at sometimes, right? But then Asia, 12 hours, Australia. What's the best approach or what you've seen work with that team collaboration, considering the time zones and the holidays? I mean, European holidays they're generous. There's a lot of them.
Yes.
And it's a different work ethic, different culture. Italy in summer. Good Lord, man. So if you want to have a central distribution hub.
Summer.
Well, Europe in summer in general, but there's some yeah, you got to be thinking of these things, but from a team perspective, and if U.S. is home base, what are some tips?
For sure. So, knowing as you're going into it, right? Are we going to support this 24/7 ourselves, right? So if you have placement in Europe and Asia and so forth, are you going to man that 24 hours yourself internally? Or do you need to do that, right? Or do you have crossover from other countries, right? So sometimes we have Europe actually supporting U.S., and as well as they're switching, right? And then of course, we have Europe sometimes Europe supporting Asia, okay, and then Asia supporting U.S. So it's as opposed to U.S. actually manning somebody 24/7 to support all of these areas.
So do you see, and I love what your company brings to the table with that regional support resources, just as you described, but what is typical in the SMB space for global companies? Are they staffing their employees abroad? Are they looking to companies like Y Technology? How do they typically handle support?
Yeah, I mean, from a support standpoint, usually it's hey, listen, we'll contact you, in emergency situations, right? Then they're contacting us, and then our local people will respond obviously first, right? If it's let me back up. Who's contacting them, right? So if they have help desk person, like I said, if they're dealing with it internally first and they get a help desk person and that person's based out of the US and then they're contacting us, then it's going to hit our U.S. folks first, right? And then we'll route it to the local people, if it's a local issue abroad, right? So depending upon the situation, it's mixed, right? We have some that are actually want us to be feet on the street immediately, and only their local people, let's say, and you mentioned China. Okay, well, China's kind of a whole separate beast that we can talk about, but they just want to be able to contact our local folks directly, and so they do that. Okay, we have to monitor it a little bit, right? Because WeChat, okay, is big over there. They want to kind of do everything with that, and so we got customers left and right, like the actual end user is trying to contact our engineers in using WeChat directly to say, hold up, guys, we have a policy, follow the U.S. policy, what have you, email, right, or whatever the normal channels are. If you want to reach out to them in additional with WeChat, that's fine, but we can't go down the rabbit hole of all of a sudden them using 50 different forms of communication where we're not tracking properly and centralized.
It's the he said, she said. I mean, you have WhatsApp, you have WeChat, and you mentioned U.S. policy. I would even say just the corporate policy, trying to take the emotion out of it, because the sidebar conversations on WeChat, you have no accountability.
Well, and if you back it up even further, Sean, when they're planning, I mean, so we talked about a little bit of getting established, right? And we didn't actually discuss, I think the assumption was you're setting up a new entity. But in many times it's an acquisition.
Yes.
Right? They decide they're going to go acquire. But regardless of which one of those are, in any business, there's all kinds of systems going on. You got the ERP, you've got your collaboration tools, you've now got AI. Like, how are you orchestrating all of that?
Right. So the bridge, and that's a good question, because,
gee, thanks.
Because
he gets lucky sometimes.
That's right.
One of the things that we've been told, okay, and this is feedback from maybe CIOs or direct IT directors or what have you, is they're desperate to try to find a company that they can talk to and have a 5 or 10 minute discussion with. Sometimes it's that fast. That person that they're talking to understands very quickly what their needs are from a global perspective, right? So if they have, with their policies, their international standardization, right? And sometimes it's literally been a 10 to 15 minute conversation that I've had with that person saying, okay, this is what you're looking for, right? Boom, 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 boom. We go down the list, right, with respect to all of the different areas that they're responsible for. And you say, and all they're doing is looking for some company that actually can do what they do in their particular area, but do it globally. Now, it sounds oversimplified, right? Of course, that's what they're looking for, but you would be surprised at how many times, the people are trying to squeeze that in, right, when they're having those discussions, and then they find out 5-6 months later, crap, okay, the person kind of said some of the right things or whatever, but then we ran into these problems because they didn't really have the local resources that they said, or the people weren't able to deliver on what they asked for.
Well, so telecommunications comes to mind. Like you talked about ERP or broad system initiatives. Well, there are regions, China being one of them. We have two major telecommunication providers in the country. Three. Government run. Yes. And you just don't have that local carrier type of things. Now you can layer on top. I mean, I'll let you get into the weeds a little bit. But these are real considerations. The timing of how you get infrastructure in place, the carrier considerations, public internet versus a dedicated line back to mainland. I mean, how do you? Because ERP systems today they're cloud-based. A lot of the things we do are cloud-based, so that connection is super important.
Right. So if the company, let's say they manage just a quick, Microsoft 365, let's say, okay, and they manage that on a single tenant, okay, then now it's being hosted, right? And if their entity, if their main office is in U.S., then it's being hosted somewhere in the U.S. on the East West Coast or whatever, right, by Microsoft. So the first thing we're going to find out is, well, are you okay with putting it in another tenant? If you're not, then now we know exactly, right, which direction we're going to end up going, and which can be costly sometimes, because now the internet peering in China, in and out of China, is very poor, right? Okay, and it's not just because of the Great Firewall of China, which is scanning and slowing things down, but there's also, it's the relationships, like you said, with actually the local internet carriers. There's no incentive, if it's government owned, then why would they enhance that international experience, right, if that's not benefiting them, right, directly, okay? There's no incentive for them to do that, right? So they're not going to do that, which means then now you have to explore an MPLS or IEPL or some type of enhanced international communication, so that you can get the performance that that you're looking for, that you're used to, that you're accustomed to.
So so you're looking at the regional countries as a connection point from China there, then back to the U.S. Is that
right? Exactly. And if you're looking at doing something from your site all the way, let's say from your China entity all the way to the U.S., and those things are not cheap. They can be costly, especially for maybe the large smalls or the but we help them navigate and understand how they can kind of get through those situations. And we have like pop to pop, which means you don't have to have it locally at your office. You can still take advantage of that international enhanced line through our data centers or what have you that already have that network set up. So it saves time, it's more flexible, it's agile, right? It's not dependent upon, and it doesn't take, it can be set up in a couple of days as opposed to having to wait 120 days, to get something set up. So, we that assessment as far as understanding their needs and their willingness to change their architecture. If they're willing to change it, then we can help them and they help cut costs and value engineer the situation. If they're more, hey, we've got to keep it this way, this structure, no problem, we can do that, but then here's what you're going to be looking at.
Well, what about, so you, obviously the connectivity and the communication is key, but then we also see companies run in, typically they'll have an attorney, somebody local that's trying to guide them, but they don't know all the nuances, right? Are you allowed to even have your software outside of the country? Does it have to be stored in country?
Data residency.
Data residence, right? Yeah. Tax compliance. Right? How are you going to, what do you do about those areas, Sean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we
that's
actually,
that's two.
Yeah, he's not counting or anything.
I'm counting.
2 this year.
Yeah.
So we do address that a lot. And to the answer to your question is, it depends upon what type of business, right? What type of industry. So let's say one of our customers, CPA firm, right? And there's auditing, local auditing for China businesses, right? And that data has to reside in China, doesn't go out. Okay. So when there's very specific rules in regards to that.
I think of some colleagues of mine, and they talk about, we have a single global instance of our ERP system. I'm like, maybe not so fast, because like Germany has data residence.
Yep.
That has to be in, right, resides in Germany, China, of course, and there's other countries. So if I'm if I'm single global instant aspirational guy, but I have places in Germany and in China, what's the approach?
Yeah, right, exactly. So
no, wait, I didn't hear a good question. It
was only a marginal question.
Yeah, I'm kidding. So. No, but yes, no, seriously. How do you architect that?
Right. So in that situation, which we've had that, then we offer that local data center option for them. And where the storage of the data can be there, and then also.
But is it still a single global instance? You're just parking data different places? Like, is it still?
I'm
getting kind of weedy here, but like, so if we're running SAP, HANA, or NetSuite, or Business Central, and so they're running the same code base, but the data can be residing in different locations with that single code base.
No.
Okay, so that's where I want to get. That's the point. So if your initiative is single global instance, you gotta be country aware because you have these factors.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there will be times where, we'll give that bad news. But like I said, if they're set on that architecture having to be that way, then we'll give them the news, right? But if they're open to changes, because a lot of times they're like single pane of glass, right?
Yeah.
But then the structure, like you mentioned, Business Central or whatever, okay, you can still have a single tenant but multiple environments, okay, and those can be hosted out of different areas, right? Without having to have another tenant. So a lot of times people think, I have to have another tenant just to have. No, you can have multiple environments.
Even in countries where you don't have that data residency problem, if you're East Coast or West Coast tenant hosting out of the data center in the U.S., that doesn't mean you're giving your friends overseas the optimal experience.
Right. That's a great point.
Yeah.
So
not a great question. Great point.
Yeah. So you touched on that as well, and there's quite a few times that we run into where the partner is going to be different, right? And the reason why is they say, well, we don't want a bunch of expensive international telecommunications going on. Okay, no problem. So we're going to partner with these, right? Well, we're already partnered with these firms here that we're able to actually manage it locally in those particular countries, right?
Well, I love the partner comment because, again, you try to centralize on some level different
partnerships are
functions,
key.
But partnerships are key. Like supporting ERP for your Belgium location, for example. To say we're just going to support out of the U.S. Even if the U.S. partner has 24/7, they're not culturally astute. There's just things, and they're human beings that you're giving support to. So you do have sort of I think that relationship part's kind of key.
Well, and
no different to me trying to get support for something, and I'm hearing some foreigner,
correct.
My first instinct is I want to hang up the phone. Can I get someone I can relate to, please?
And the challenge, while English is the language of business, I'm going to say, at least in my experience, Sean, you check me, English is clearly the common language among senior business leaders. But when I get into line staff in some of these overseas locations, their English, and this is no reflection on them, they haven't had to use it, but their English is not good. So if you're going to try to have an English speaker or even a U.S. North American-based person supporting somebody elsewhere, I think you're going to have a less than optimal experience.
Well, for sure, and that we see that happen quite a bit. What we'll have the main discussion, and then I'll watch after we're done, and I'll see them exit and then have all these side conversations with each other. I watch for how many are they going on, and then I can advise senior leadership.
So again, this is where companies like yours. So the takeaway is you have to leverage. We're recommending you leverage partnerships, local partnership.
Team minimum, right? You got to have a technology partner, you got to have a legal partner, and you should probably have some form of general manager or somebody that's on the ground, right? I mean, what do you think of that?
And I'll just tell you straight up, and this is, maybe controversial, but I'll just tell you what, the facts as far as percentages, right? I would estimate that, 90% of the time that they have maybe the local management staff in that overseas entity, and there's nobody kind of representing corporate there locally or whatever, a foreigner, if you will, we see issues about 90% of the time. Yeah. That's on, granted, that's on more of an M&A standpoint with respect to the acquisitions and so forth. But, and then when they launch, or if they launch a new facility, right? But, and because there's a lot of reasons, but the collaboration And that's, remember before when I said teaming up that local person from corporate and then, and then that area. That's why that's so key, is trust too, right? So them understanding, and they have to get through that initial phase that you guys talked about, is why are you here? We're having this conversation, but what's the end game, right? And trust is still key.
Specificity aside, I have seen where having, I'll say, a foreigner GM, depending on the region, in place versus a local person tends to bear more fruit.
So that 90% of the
being
time,
polite.
yeah. So we talked about, and it's because there's so many variables there. There's the trust factor. There's also the communication, like we talked about before. And why do people sometimes say, when they're even getting support, well, I don't want to go overseas, I want somebody local. Well, why, right? There's a lot of reasons why. We all know the reasons
there
why.
is, and you hear all the reasons. You hear all the excuses. Well, no, I mean they've been in this region for many years. They're highly respected. These are all code words for A, I don't want to have to deal with it, and 2, I'm okay with having 2 sets of books. Again, we're not going to get too specific here, but it is a point of consideration, is the type of leadership that you want in this location. But the part I was keying on earlier was the perception. Like when you said, you have these corporate meetings and everybody disbands, and then there's all these side conversations.
Right.
So what I loved with what you brought to the table for the organization I was involved with, you were resident in the facility and you just observed, right, and seeing what we don't see when we're there. Yeah. So you could have an entire day on site, you and your team, and not 2 words are exchanged the whole day, but the wealth of information off of those observations.
Oh, for sure.
It gets ahead of the problems, or at least gives us some intel.
Forecasts them anyway, right?
It does. Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's think about how the conversation went for the first 20 minutes or so. Like, we're not here to paint a picture of gloom and heartache that's coming, right? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of benefits. We're better together. Diversity is a good thing. We're in a global economy, but there are some very real considerations to help prevent mistakes and timeline extensions and.
Well, and you touched on it, but the global opportunity is huge. So if you think you have a product that could play in other markets, by all means, we think the world is a big playground and you should go after it.
Yeah. If you're seeing the precautionary things that we're communicating as negative, that is not the intention, as you put, right? It's actually the opposite. It's risk mitigation. And if we can help mitigate that risk for you, right, proactively, then you're ahead already before you started. And that's what we want to do. So it's a very positive thing, for sure.
Yeah, and don't fall in love with the quotes. We're going to fabricate, or we're going to put infrastructure in for an overseas expansion. Like something as simple as cable runs, network runs. There's distance limitations, but we've seen time and time again that cutting corners on a proposal means we're eking out that distance a little bit more when we should have introduced a new closet. I mean, these are the things we just got to be mindful of, because saying that there's a local contract, they're experts in the region, and we got this covered, just have a set of eyes on it, and let's be sure, because that comes back to bite you later.
Absolutely.
Sean, thanks again. Appreciate your time. This was very educational.
My pleasure.
Glad to have you with us. It's been a great discussion.
Thanks, Tom.
We'll see you all.
Take care.